كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والعاقبة للمتقين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. In these coming few videos, we're going to be having a look at some more examples and scenarios in relation to speaking to a person and what exactly is referred to as speaking. What happens if, for example, you are speaking to somebody and they're sleeping? What happens if you're speaking to somebody who is deaf and is unable to hear? Is that going to fulfill the ruling of speaking or not? Are we going to say that the person is speaking, or are we going to say that the person is not speaking and is the oath going to break or not? We'll also be having a look at certain words that are used to reference a time period. So if a person says, I'm not going to speak to you for days, or for weeks, or for months, or forever, or for a lifetime, or they use it similar in Arabic, حين, zaman, ayyam, shuhur, sinun, dahar, abad, and all of these types of words. What does it apply to? Is there a fixed number that we can apply to it, or is it going to be unlimited period of time? So we're going to be having a look at different types of words and that are used to reference a time period and see how we can designate a time period. That's going to be important because you want to know if the oath is going to become invalid or not. Once we've completed that discussion, we'll then be looking at, again, a whole set of cases again, but now the discussion is going to be in scenarios related to food and food items. So if a person says, I'm not going to eat wheat, for example, now what happens if they eat wheat raw? What happens if they take the wheat and they convert it into bread, flour and then bread? What happens if they turn it into flour and use it for some cakes and they eat the cake, they eat the bread? Is that going to be considered eating wheat or not? So we'll be looking at scenarios related to food. And now here there's going to be a lot of discussion in relation to the literal meaning of words and also what the customary practice is when it comes to food items. So customary practice is going to play a very big role in the next few videos that we have a look at, insha'Allah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Continuing with our discussions and scenarios in regards to taking an oath. Now, in the last video we spoke a little bit about speaking and what speech actually refers to. So we said that when you mention I'm not going to speak to somebody, then it's in reference to conversation with somebody. It does not apply to things like reciting the Quran or doing some form of dhikr, as that is not speech, as that is not what we consider customarily to be speaking. So in this scenario now, we're looking at a bit more about when exactly are you considered to be speaking. So the fuqaha say, حَلَفَ لَا يُكَلِّمُهُ فَكَلَّمَهُ بِحَيْثُ يَسْمَعُ إِلَّا أَنَّهُ نَائِمٌ حَنِيثًا. So you say that I am not going to speak to Imran. I swear by Allah, I am not going to speak to Imran. And then you spoke in a manner that technically he could hear. So you're in the same room. Speak in a manner where they can't hear is like if I'm in one building and Imran is in another building and I just start speaking. I'm not on the phone. He can't see me through the window. There's no connection at all. Then we're not really speaking. I'm just speaking to the air. But if we're both in the same room and I'm speaking in a way that he would be able to hear me, but he's sleeping. If he wasn't sleeping, he would have heard me. Or if he wasn't sleeping, he would be conscious that I'm speaking to him. Then in that case, takallum has been found. Takallum has been found. Why? Because technically you're still speaking. You're still speaking to him. And speech has been found. Just what has not been found is the fact that the individual has not kind of recognized or understood what is being said because of an external reason, which is the fact that they are sleeping. Similarly, if there's a deaf person who can't hear, right? And if there's a deaf person standing in front of me and I start talking and I start speaking to that person, an onlooker would say, yes, I'm speaking to a deaf person, and say, what is wrong with you? Why are you speaking to a deaf person? Why are you trying to converse and engage in conversation with a deaf person? So even though the individual is deaf, we will still consider that to be speaking. We'll say, why are you speaking to a deaf person? Because we acknowledge that this is actually speech. So when it comes to, provided that one person is verbalizing words and sentences and phrases that are used in speech, we will consider that person to be speaking. So as long as that is being verbalized and there is a recipient who could potentially receive that, then we will consider that person to have spoken, even if there's a reason why the individual is not comprehending that. Maybe they can't hear, or maybe they are deaf, they can't hear because of that reason, or maybe they are sleeping. So its speech has still taken place, so the oath will become invalid. Now, if they said لو كلم غيره وقصد أن يسمع لم يحدث, here there's an important, mention of intention and direction of conversation. So I have two people in front of me. I have X and I have Y. I swear by Allah, I will not speak to X. I swear by Allah, I will not speak to X. Then what I do is I turn to Y. Right, so X is over here. I swear by Allah, I'm not going to speak to X. And what I do is I then turn to Y and I start speaking to Y, and my intention is to speak to Y, but I know that X is going to be able to overhear. I know that X is going to be able to overhear. So what happens in this scenario? Am I speaking to X? No. I know that X can hear me, but officially I am speaking to person Y. So the speech and the speaking is taking place with this person. So if my oath was I will not speak to X, I haven't spoken to X, I am speaking to Y, even if I know that even if I know that the individual might or will be able to overhear what I am saying. Now, what happens if you said I'm not going to speak to X, and X is in a room with a group of people, and you walk in and you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's really interesting now, right? Because you're saying salam to everybody. So what happens? The fuqaha say لو سلم على جماعة هو فيهم حنيثة. If you walk into a room and you say Assalamu alaikum, what happened? You have engaged in speech with the entire group of people and the entire congregation. And is X part of that congregation? Yes. So if you're addressing the entire congregation and X is part of the congregation, you have also addressed X and you have also spoken to X. So by saying Assalamu alaikum to everybody, then it will break. The difference in the other scenarios was you spoke to a particular person and X was overhearing. That is a different scenario. That won't take effect. But here you are speaking to X and other people, ultimately. That's what's happening. However, what can override this? Intention can override this. So if the person, sometimes if you don't like somebody and you're avoiding speaking to them, right? And you walk upon people and you're going to have a conversation with a group of people and X is there, but you're actually talking to all of them, you don't really want to talk or engage with X. So even though he's standing there, but you're actually talking to the group of people, you say, I have the conversation with that group of people, even though X is there, but you're just kind of not acknowledging them at all. So if the person has an intention that when I'm saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, that I am intending everybody but X, I don't want to give salam to X, then we will say the intention will be applicable and the oath will not break, because intention has that power when it comes to taking and making an oath. So that is in reference to now speech. Carrying on with a bit of more discussion related to speech. حلف لا يكلم عبد فلان يعتبر ملكه يوم الحنث لا يوم الحلف وكذا الثوب والدار. Okay, this is interesting. Now what we're looking at here is there are two events in regards to an oath. You have the time in which the oath is taken, and you have the time in which the oath is being broken, right? And because there's a period of time in between, circumstances can change, situation can change. So you might say, I am not going to speak to Imran's slave. I am not going to speak to Imran's slave. Okay? Now you took this oath at 10 a.m. I am not going to speak to Imran's slave. And Imran has 2 slaves. At 11 o'clock, Imran frees one of them. At 11 o'clock, 1 hour later, Imran frees one of them. And this person then goes and speaks to the freed slave. He then goes and speaks to the freed slave. Is the oath broken or not? Is the oath broken or not? So there are 2 ways of looking at this. Either we can say that, look, at the time that you took the oath, this was Imran's slave. So therefore you must be intending this individual as well. Or we can say that no, at the time of speaking to the individual, they were not Imran's slave, so you haven't ultimately spoken to Imran's slave, because when you did speak to this person, they were not Imran's slave. So the fuqaha say, يُعْتَبَرُ مِلْكُهُ يَوْمَ الْحِنْثِ لَا يَوْمَ الْحَلِفِ. You look at the time of the action taking place, not the time of the oath taking place and taking effect. So if the ownership is still there when you're speaking, then the oath will break. If the ownership is not there when speaking, then the oath is not going to break. Oaths are there to avoid being broken, right? You take an oath not to break it. You don't want to avoid hinth. So therefore hinth is what is essential and what is important, not the time of taking an oath. That's just enacting the oath. That's just making the oath come into effect, but it's all about the consequence, it's all about the end. So similar scenario, if a person says that they will not eat somebody else's fruit, or they will not stay in somebody else's house, and then that individual ended up selling those fruits, and then this person went and ate it, or the individual sold the house, and then this individual ended up entering into the house, right? The ownership is no longer there. So if the ownership is no longer there, then the oath is not going to be invalid and will not break, because you said you're not going to eat a person's fruit, and it no longer is that person's fruit. You are not going to enter into a person's house, and it is no longer that individual's house. So for these reasons, the principle here that we're looking at is, you take into consideration the moment at which the oath is being invalidated, or you think it's being invalidated, not the time that the oath is being articulated. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So we had a look at this scenario where an individual is saying that I will not speak to a person's slave. So we need to look at the moment in which, and if there's a change in circumstance, then we don't look at the moment in which the oath was taken, we look at the moment in which the oath we think is being violated. So at that point, is the person still their slave? Does the person still own the fruits? Does the person still own the house or not? Now, there's a bit of a difference in this next scenario. A person says that I will not speak to this particular friend. I will not speak to this particular spouse, right? Then there's a bit of an argument between 2 individuals, and the person is no longer the friend. So let's say on Monday they say, I swear by Allah, I will not speak to this friend of mine. I will not speak to this friend of mine. And there's an argument, there's an altercation, and then the next day you say these 2 aren't friends at all. And then he then goes and he speaks to that person. The fuqaha say in this case, even though at the time of taking an oath they might be friends, but now they're not friends, even in this case the oath is going to break. Similarly, if a person says, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to speak to my spouse, and then they have an argument, and later on they get divorced, and they're no longer a spouse, and then the person goes and speaks to them, in that case, the oath is also going to break. Now, what's the reason here? The reason here is that when a person says that I'm not going to speak to a friend, or I'm not going to speak to a spouse, it's because of something bad that the person's probably done, right? They've done something to annoy them, that's why they don't want to speak to them. So when they say friend, or when they say spouse in this case, it's that they're not intending the friendship here. They're not intending the fact that they're a partner, right? The intention here is not, I will not speak to my friend, meaning I'm not going to speak to any of my friends. No. You're trying to just identify which particular person you're speaking about. Their friendship is really irrelevant here. The purpose is not here to focus on the friendship. And the intention is not to focus on the marriage. The focus here is on the actual individual themselves, right? So let's say we could look at this in two ways. When a person says, I swear by Allah, I will not speak to my friends. So in that case, maybe the person is saying that, a wife is spending a lot of time on the phone speaking to her friends, for example. And the husband gets really annoyed with her and says, you keep speaking to all your friends all the time, and, we need to spend more time as a family and X, Y, and Z, right? So she says, okay, I swear by Allah, I will not speak to my friends. Then in that case, the intention is really the friends, that anyone that is considered her friend, she will not speak to them. However, in this case, when a person says, I will not speak to this friend, I will not speak to this person, right? I will not speak to my friend Imran, then the intention here is not, the reason for not speaking to that person is not because they are your friend, but the reason for not speaking to that person is because there's some sort of issue between the two. So it doesn't matter whether in the future that person is no longer their friend. It doesn't really matter. The reason why you said friend is to actually, this is the person who I'm talking about. The person has one friend, for example. So he says, this is who I'm referring to. Or when he says, I'm not going to speak to my wife. I'm not going to speak to my wife because you're angry with your wife. Your intention, your reason for saying wife is not because she is your wife and you want to make it clear as to who you can't speak to. Your intention is that particular individual, right? I'm referring to this particular person. You're not saying my wife because you're trying to not reference anybody else and only those people who are your wives. No. So that's why in this particular case, if the person says, I will not speak to my friend, I will not speak to my wife, and then there's an argument and they are no longer friends, or there's a divorce and they go and speak to that person, then the oath will break because you have spoken to that person. And the use of the word friend or wife here is to identify who you are referring to. I'm referring to this particular person, and you're just using sadiq, friend, or zawj or zawja here to help people identify which person you're in reference to. In the last scenario, when you said I'm not going to speak to a particular person's servant, then it's actually slavery that is intended here. Then anyone who is a slave, I will not speak to, and whoever is not a slave, I will not speak to. So that now concludes those discussions in reference to those types of oaths in relation to speech and so on. Now the fuqaha then, after this point, they mention a little bit about words that are used to mention time, right? So for example, we may say, I will not speak to you forever. I will not speak to you for a period of time. I will not speak to you for months. I will not speak to you for weeks. I will not speak to you for days. So when you have this type of a scenario, what time period is intended? What time period is going to be applicable? A person says, I will not speak to you for weeks. Okay, how many weeks? 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, 100 weeks, 1,000 weeks. When do we consider this? So there's a bit of a discussion here. The fuqaha, they mention some of these time periods in Arabic, and they give them a number to go by, otherwise it becomes difficult to apply. So if a person uses the word heen or az-zaman, they use the word heen or they use the word az-zaman, I will not speak to you for zaman in Arabic. La ukallimuka zamanan. I will not speak to you for al-heen, right? So the fuqaha say that will be applicable to 6 months. So heen and zaman will be applicable for 6 months, regardless of whether you use it ma'rifah or nakira, whether you say az-zaman or zaman. Az-zaman or zamanun, zamanan, it doesn't matter. It will be applicable for 6 months. If there's an intention, then the intention will apply. If you say zaman and you intend 3 months, then of course that will apply. Or you intend 1 year, then that will apply. But in the absence of an intention, then we're going to go by 6 months, because that is considered a moderate amount of time. If a person says ad-dahr, I will not speak to you ad-dahr, right? Ad-dahr is al-abad, it's forever, right? It's forever. And this is when you use the word dahr in the ma'rifah. Dahr with ma'rifah. If you use dahr as nakira, dahran, then Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmatullahi, he doesn't have a rule as to what happens if you say dahran. But Sahibain, they say that it is the same as zaman, so it will be applicable for 6 months. So if you use heen or zaman in the ma'rifah or nakira, it's 6 months. If you use al-abad, it is forever. If you use abadan, then according to Sahibain, it's 6 months also, just like heen and zaman. Now, if a person using the nakira says ayyam, shuhur, sinun, let's start with the ma'rif. If they now they use ayyam, sinun, sunun, and shuhur and sunun, weeks, days, months, and years. They say, I will not speak to you for days. I will not speak to you for months. I will not speak to you for years. Right? Now, if they use it in the nakira, ayyaman, shuhuran, or sinunan, for example, right? Then in the nakira, they're going to apply 3 only. Why? Because that's the minimum of plural. In Arabic, when you have plural, it's 3 and above. So by saying ayyaman, it's plural. The minimum of a plural is 3. So if they say, I will not speak to you ayyaman, then that means 3 days you won't speak to them. If you say shuhuran, then it's going to be 3 months. And if it's sinunan, then it's going to be 3 years. Right? Sahibain say that ayyam should be 7 days, shuhur should be 12 months, and anything else should be lifelong, because there are 7 days in a week, there are 12 months in a year. So ayyam should refer to a full set, which is 7 days in a week. Shuhur should refer to a full set of months. There are only 12 months in a year, and then anything beyond that should be lifelong. So there's a bit of a difference here, that when it comes to using ayyam, shuhur, and sinun in the nakira, it should be 3. According to Sahibain, ayyam will be 7, days will be 7, months will be 12, and sunun will be lifetime. If you do it in the ma'rifah, if you use it in the ma'rifah, then it refers to 10. So al-ayyam will be 10 days, al-shuhur will be 10 months, and al-sinun will be 10 years. So this is if you're going to use time stipulation within the oath and words that reference a particular time period. In the next video, what we're going to do now is we're going to be looking at oaths that are taken in relation to food. So we'll be looking at what is a customary practice when it comes to speaking and interacting in relation, taking oaths in relation to food items, inshallah ta'ala. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. In these few videos now, in this video, that we're going to be looking at cases and scenarios where individuals take an oath not to eat a particular food. And we're going to be looking at now how the customary practice plays a role, how intention plays a role when it comes to certain food items, because you may say a word, and again, as always, the word has the scope to incorporate this much, but the customary practice is to only apply to a particular amount. And then again, of course, intention will also play a crucial role here. So scenario number 1 is حلف لا يأكل من هذه الحنطة لا يحنث ما لم يقضمها ومن هذا الدقيق يحنث بخبزه دون سفه. Okay, this is interesting, right? There are 2 scenarios here. One is a person takes an oath, I swear by Allah, I will not eat these wheat grains. So you have a set of wheat grains, and you say, I swear by Allah, I will not eat these wheat grains. And then you have some flour on the side, separate pot of flour, and you say, I swear by Allah, I will not eat this flour. Now the application for both are going to be very different. When it comes to wheat, if the individual consumed the wheat itself, if the individual consumed the actual wheat as it is, right, and you chew the wheat grains as they are, then according to Imam Abu Hanifa, the oath will break. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, the oath will break. Now, if the wheat grains are turned into, say, flour and then turn into bread, and then the person consumes the bread. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, the oath will not break. Why? Because you said you're not going to eat the wheat grains, right? So understand that scenario first. A person says, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to eat these wheat grains. Now, if you start chewing the grains themselves and eating them as they are, then according to the scholars, the oath is going to break and you've eaten the wheat grains. Khalas. If the wheat grains are then grounded and turned into flour, and then the flour is used to turn into bread, and then you consume the bread, technically you have eaten the wheat grains, but it's been converted and modified into bread, right? In this scenario, Imam Abu Hanifa says the oath will not break. Sahibain say the oath will break. Now what's the difference between the two opinions? Imam Abu Hanifa says, look, the literal meaning here of eating the actual wheat grain, people eat wheat grains raw as they are. Maybe at the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, I don't know about now, whether people eat wheat grains in that manner. But if the literal meaning of wheat, the literal meaning of wheat is the wheat grain, right? And then majazan, metaphorically, anything that's made from the wheat is also considered the wheat, so the bread is considered the wheat. So Imam Hanifa says that the hakiki, the literal meaning, is still applicable. People are still applying the literal meaning. People are still eating wheat grains raw. So therefore, we should only apply the hakiki meaning. We can't go to the majazi meaning. So when a person says, I swear by Allah, I will not eat wheat grains, and in the custom of the people, wheat grains are something that are eaten, then we will apply it only to wheat grains. And if that wheat is then modified into other items and products and eaten, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, we're going to stick to the literal meaning, because the literal meaning is still applicable and is still being used. Sahibain say no, the custom, we're going to look at the custom. So we're going to look at the custom of the people is when they say wheat, they refer to anything made from wheat. So for example, you have wheat, bread made from wheat. Maybe you have some bread made from barley, you have bread made from other grains. And a person, by saying, I'm not going to eat wheat, means they're on a wheat-free diet, for example. So anything that is made from wheat, they're not going to consume. So Sahibain look at the customary practice. Now when it comes to flour, so you've got the flour, which is already grounded. And a person says, I swear by Allah that I will not eat this flour. Now, of course, according to Sahibain, if the flour is turned into bread and you eat it, the oath is going to break. But in this scenario, even Imam Abu Hanifa says that if the flour is turned into bread, the oath will break. And if a person just ate the flour as it is, the oath is not going to break. Now why here? Why is there a difference here? Because Imam Abu Hanifa says the literal meaning of eating flour as it is not something that people do. People don't just eat flour as it is. They take flour and they turn it into bread. As for wheat, it was something that was eaten. So when it came to wheat, Imam Abu Hanifa said the literal meaning of eating wheat is still applicable, so we're not going to go to the majaz. Sahibain say we're going to look at the customary practice. Now when it comes to wheat, the literal meaning is to eat the actual wheat itself. When it comes to flour, the literal meaning is to eat the actual flour itself. However, this literal meaning is abandoned, it's matruka, it's hakika matruka, right? It's a literal meaning which is not used and is not in application at all anywhere. So because of that, Imam Abu Hanifa says even if a person was to eat the flour, the oath is not going to break, because what we're going to apply it to here is we're going to apply it to the scenario where flour is turned into something and then consumed, right? So by eating the actual flour, the oath is not going to break at all, unless, and hopefully you should be able to fill what I'm going to say here now, unless the person intends by eating flour actually eating the flour itself. That I swear by Allah, I'm not going to eat this flour that's in front of me, and you have that intention of flour, then of course the intention will override. So here we're looking at something slightly different now. Now the principle that we're engaging with is where you look at the literal meaning of something, and you see is the literal meaning still in effect, or is the literal meaning not in effect. Hanifa said if the literal meaning is effect, we have to apply that, we won't go to the majaz. And if the literal meaning is not in effect, then even if somebody managed to carry out the literal meaning, the oath is not going to break. Now, so if the literal meaning is not applicable, then you're going to go to the customary meaning. Now when you say that I'm not going to eat khubz, I'm not going to eat khubz, right? you then have to look at what is customarily considered to be khubz. So if a person says, I'm not going to eat bread, right? Now then you have to look at the customary practice. What do people consider to be bread? What is considered to be bread in the custom of the people? So for example, you have like roti, chapati, for example. Is that considered to be bread in the custom of people? So for example, in England, when you say bread, what do you refer to? Are you referring to those bread loaves? Does it apply to chapati, for example? Or does it apply to naan bread? Does it apply to different types of bread? So what is the custom of the people when they are referring to bread? You have to look at that custom. So the fuqaha, what they do is they look at the example of tharid. So tharid is where you have bread kind of mixed into a curry, and it becomes a meal in and of itself. So it's not just bread alone by itself. What happens is you have bread and you have a curry, and it's kind of all mixed in together. And the dish is now called tharid. So you're not considered to be eating bread with curry. So it's not like you take a piece of bread and you eat some curry. You take a piece of bread, eat some curry. Take a piece of bread, eat some curry with it. No. The bread is kind of broken up into pieces and it's mixed into the curry. And now you have a new dish called tharid. Right? So the fuqaha say that based on their custom, based on their practice, eating tharid was not considered to be eating bread. The person took an oath that I will not eat bread, and then they ate tharid, the oath will not break because of the custom. Now if you say, I'm not going to eat food, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to eat food. Food is something which is, food literally is something which is eaten. So anything which goes into your mouth really is considered eating and therefore should be considered food. But again, customarily we only refer to certain items as food. So medication, someone's taking a medicine, it goes into their mouth, they're swallowing it. If it goes into the mouth and they're swallowing it, they're eating it. So technically you're eating medication. But you don't, if it's going to your mouth and you're swallowing it, it's eating. If you're eating it, it's food, right? But we don't consider medication to be food. So if a person says, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to eat food, and then they take some medication, we won't consider that customarily to be eating food. We'll consider that to be taking medication, and therefore the oath will not break. So like this, in the next few videos, we're going to be having a look at all the different circumstances in relation to food items and what the application is going to be there. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, in the last few videos we have had a look at a few topics. The first topic that we had a look at was some more detail and discussion in relation to kalam, speech, and engaging in conversation. And we said that as long as a person is speaking to another individual, speaking will be found and the oath will break, even if the person cannot comprehend that information because they are sleeping or because they are deaf, for example. And then there were a few sub-scenarios, like if you say salam to a congregation, then we look at who is the recipient of that salam and what is the intention of the person when they are saying salam. We also had a look at certain scenarios in relation to time and words related to time. So we mentioned that heen and zaman, if you use those words, it refers to 6 months. Al-abad refers to, ad-dahr refers to an unlimited amount of time. As for the word dahran in the nakira, Sahibain say it's the same as zaman, where it refers to 6 months. And then we said if you use ayyam, shuhur and sinun with a ma'rifah, it refers to 10. And if you use it in the nakira, it refers to 3. Sahibain have an alternative opinion when it comes to the nakira, and they say that no, it should be 7 for days, 12 for months, and anything else should be lifelong. Then we had a look at some food cases and where literal meanings are being used and where literal meanings are not being used. If the literal meaning of a word is applicable and people do use that word as it is, then we go by the literal meaning according to Imam Abu Hanifa. And if the literal meaning is not in application, then we don't go by that. So if a person says, I will not eat wheat, wheat is something that is still eaten as it is. So therefore, if you eat wheat, then the oath will break. If you eat something else made from the wheat, the oath will not break. Whereas if a person says, I will not eat flour, flour is not something that is eaten just like that. So the literal meaning is not in application. So we go by the majazi meaning. So if you eat bread made from the flour, the oath will break. If you just eat the flour raw by itself, then the oath will not break unless there was an intention. Of course, as always, intention overrides the word, the customary practice of the